Thresholds of the Unseen, Part 2. By Elton Gar. As the Eclipse Runner continued its unprecedented journey through the vast, enigmatic anomaly, the weight of their mission loomed large over the crew. Previously, Captain Bret had declared the necessity of speed paramount, acknowledging the potentially lifelong duration of their journey if they maintained their current pace. The crew, led by Deks, the ship's designer, had been tasked with finding innovative ways to navigate through the dark, energy-absorbing expanse more swiftly.
With no idea what is in here, and our only sensors being visual, I could maintain about twice this speed. Perhaps faster for short times, but that's only going to give us a few seconds reaction time once something is close enough to see to avoid hitting it,
the pilot said. Deks wondered if he should learn the pilot's name, and he almost opened his mouth to ask it. But his mother had taught him that changing subjects like that could be jarring to other people, so he didn't.
How many probes do we have left?
The captain asked. Deks glanced down at the displays on his station and said,
4, but they aren't designed to work in an atmosphere either. Their sensors won't be any better than the ship's.
I was thinking more of a relay. We send the probes out as far as they can while remaining connected, then have them match our speed. Each probe would send data to the next one in the chain, and we'd be able to use that to see further.
About twice as far,
Deks said, doing the math as the captain suggested the idea. It wasn't difficult, but several people still glanced at him, seeming surprised he had come up with that answer that fast. These were supposed to be engineers and pilots, not artists, and he wondered if perhaps he had been too hard on the people of Etries. Perhaps it wasn't just them that didn't understand him.
That will get us some speed while we work out a better solution,
the captain said. It wasn't wrong, but the amount of speed would be less than he might like. The delay from the relay on the probe would mean that they'd only be adding a few seconds worth of reaction time. And since humans required about 2 seconds to react to anything, and more than that to do it well, they'd still need to go remarkably slow for a spaceship. But he didn't bother to point out that it would still take most of 100 years. The captain had already said he wanted a better solution. Deks didn't have a better solution, only a few questions, but Bethany said,
I think we have 2 relay buoys as well.
Those were used when the ship got too far away from a gateway for easy communication, allowing them to do largely the same thing that they were planning to do with the probes.
They're stationary,
Deks said.
We could shoot them out. If someone did the math correctly, we could match their speed, then launch the probes to extend it out the rest of the way. That's at least a little further.
The relay buoy were better designed for this than the probes, and he could do the math. It wasn't easy. Shooting them out was significantly more work, and the pilot had to fly half blind to match their speed until the probes were in place, or they wouldn't gain the speed they wanted. But after all that, they were able to go fast enough that they would finish the mission in their lifetime. Deks wasn't there for the actual launching. His scheduled sleep time was an hour before they planned to launch, and he had been told how important schedules were on a military ship. When he woke, he got his breakfast and went to the bridge. Half the crew was still there from the night before, including several people who had the same sleep shift as him. They looked tired, but he knew saying that could come across as rude to people, so he simply said,
Why didn't you sleep?
One of the people glanced at him and said,
Isn't this exciting to you?
The science is fascinating, but it will be fascinating for many days to come, and I can't avoid sleep that entire time. But I would like to know what has happened.
The atmosphere is thicker than it was. Only about 4%, but if that keeps up, well, none of us have done the math.
Assuming that we maintain the same velocity, and assuming that the center of gravity is also the center of the anomaly, then it would have enough pressure in the center of the anomaly to create a large star. But the same amount of gravity should have drawn in the atmosphere. So it seems more likely that we are nearing the source of the atmosphere, and once it reaches the desired pressure, it will remain steady.
The young engineer looked confused, and Deks said,
It will stabilize soon, and once it does, I suspect things may become more interesting. So perhaps you should sleep until then.
The engineer said,
Captain, I could use a nap.
Your shift ended 8.5 hours ago, and no one asked you to stay. Get some sleep.
The captain then went back to working on something on the armrest of his chair until the young man left the room and then said,
Have you considered a job in human relations? I wouldn't have expected him to go to sleep before he collapsed.
Deks was confused, so he went to his default and simply answered the question. He said,
I have not considered it. I have been told that I am bad with people and should focus on machines.
The captain smiled, a look that didn't fully fit the alien face, and said,
Humans put too much emphasis on social etiquette. My people focus more on results, and you get results.
Deks had never thought of it that way before, but it was a bit like engineering. There was room for beauty, but simply working was more important than the artistry. Perhaps he could apply the same principle to people. That line of thought was interrupted by a huge, rippling balloon. It was covered in blue of shifting colors that blended into the sky, so they were practically on top of it before they saw it clearly. There seemed no doubt that it was alive. That became even more clear when it turned, and one of its massive eyes looked at them. As it saw them, it began to deflate and zip away from them.
Well, that settles that. There is something alive here,
the captain said.
It seemed more like an animal than something that built something more advanced than anything in the Alliance,
Bethany said.
It probably is. There are plenty of animals on Alliance habitats. I understand humans are quite fond of their pets, and some of them still eat them,
Captain Bret said.
They don't typically eat the pets, but they do raise animals for food,
Deks said. The people on his world didn't raise animals for food, but they did grow meat. Even though the idea of killing for it was disturbing, he understood the appeal of the taste. No one told him that the statement had been a joke, so he assumed he had read the situation correctly this time. He also began to adjust one of the sensors.
Who is messing with the forward sensor?
Bethany asked a few seconds later.
Since it isn't fulfilling its function, I decided to see if I could use it to find more of those creatures,
Deks said, a bit confused. What he was doing would improve the functionality of the ship, so why wouldn't he do it?
It's customary to tell people when you're making adjustments to ship systems,
the captain said, then added.
Of course, most of those ships have hundreds of crew, so keeping track of everything is a bit more complicated.
Deks understood procedure and why it would be necessary. On a larger ship, there would be no way to keep track of everything. But he didn't apologize. He had been told he did that too much. Instead, he said,
I think there are a lot of them.
Can you add the data to the view screen?
The captain asked. It took longer to make certain that it didn't disrupt the pilot's view than it did to route the information, and then the glowing outline of creatures began to appear. A few seconds later, someone else adjusted it so that the brightness of the outline dimmed as it was further away, so that they got a sense of distance on the image. There were hundreds of them. But it wasn't just that within a few miles there were hundreds of the creatures, it was the variety. Just like animals everywhere, they had some connection of form. They had all evolved together in the atmosphere of a world. Perhaps a gas giant.
That one,
the captain said, pointing out one of the creatures. At first, Deks didn't fully understand, but then he saw that it had some type of tentacle. Several of them did, but the others were mostly dragging behind them like they were skimming for resources or perhaps reaching out for prey. But that one had them twisted.
It might be holding something,
Bethany said.
Would you like me to change course, Captain?
The pilot asked.
Slow us down as we get near it. A ship this size rushing towards me would make me a bit nervous,
the captain said. The ship was bigger than any of the creatures, but not by much. But their target was considerably smaller. And as they approached, it became more clear on the view screen. It was still out of any visual range, and his adjustments to the sensors only showed the creatures, not whatever they were holding. But even though it didn't show up, it was more clear it was holding something.
How do you think they make tools in an environment where they don't have anything solid?
The captain asked.
There is a significant amount of dust and even metal in the atmosphere, and the air sacs suggest they draw a great deal in. They must process it so that they can keep at the right level in the atmosphere. Perhaps they evolved a way to make tools out of that,
Bethany said. There was more speculation than Deks liked, but it all seemed to fit.
Or there is some ground somewhere, and they just bring the tools with them.
One of the other men said. Also, a possibility, Deks agreed, though it was hard to imagine a solid ground big enough to support the ecosystem here that wasn't so big they wouldn't have sensed the gravity. They didn't have to wait long to see it. Even slowing down and reversing thrusters as they approached the creature, they reached it in about 15 minutes. It was no more humanoid than any of the other things here, but it felt more human because it had what he could only describe as a tool belt wrapped around it, and a tool it was holding while it built something. The thing it was building was metal, but that was the limit of what Deks could make out. Part of that was because it was covered in paneling, but mostly it was because it didn't have any structure that he understood. The thing saw them and shot away as fast as the other creatures they had approached. But after a few seconds, it turned and came back. It moved slowly, and huge blue eyes looked at them. Then its head turned, and another eye, this one green, stared unblinkingly at them. The size of the creatures meant that the eye was the same size as the windows on the bridge, and it would have been easy to be intimidated. Deks reminded himself that as large as the creature appeared, much of its bulk was an air bladder. Despite its size, the Eclipse Runner could easily overpower it by sheer structural integrity alone. Yet Captain Bret commanded a full stop, signaling a pause in their mission and a moment of respect for the unknown entity approaching them. The creature took out what appeared to be an oddly shaped hammer from its tool belt. With cautious movements, it tapped gently on the ship's hull. The ship vibrated subtly under the creature's touch, a light, exploratory contact that posed no threat to the integrity of their vessel. This gesture seemed not aggressive but curious, a benign attempt at interaction. As the captain and crew watched the creature retreat slightly before returning to tap again, the mood on the bridge was a blend of awe and tense anticipation. Here, at the edge of known space, they were not just explorers, but witnesses to the inexplicable and the extraordinary. This encounter hinted at the depth of the mysteries waiting in the uncharted expanses of the Anomaly. With the creature's green eye staring intently, almost scrutinizing the Eclipse Runner, Deks wondered if it perceived them as just another curious entity of the cosmos. This moment, rich with potential for understanding or disaster, marked a pause in their journey, a quiet before whatever came next in the vast, echoing unknown. Author's note.
Just a quick note to say thank you for listening to my story. The third part should be out on Tuesday. If you're watching this later, then the link should already be on the screen. If you're enjoying it, you can get more stories from me by signing up for my newsletter at scifi.com or get access to over 30 patron-exclusive stories at patreon.com/Elton. Thank you. Elton Gar.